So anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with multiple women in Marvel Universe. So let's start the series. Naruto had trudged the plains of this unknown world for what had felt like eons. Nothing existed here besides demons and apparitions that seemingly took great pleasure in his futile efforts to escape. He had tried everything that had come to his mind, even destroyed this world a few times, but was seemingly always returned back to those infernal gates over and over again like he was trapped in some sort of sick, twisted game. The events that had unfolded to bring him here were still a little bit hazy. It had all happened so fast. All he remembered was her mocking smile and then a powerful pull as he was thrust into an ever-encompassing darkness. Naruto stumbled upon a hilltop, his gaze fell upon a large rock inscribed with the leaf insignia and he let out a terribly sad sigh. I'm back here again, huh? I wonder if you would have found your way out of here. Sasuke, Kaguya had played them all or at least was prepared to lose from the very beginning. Her final actions before she had been returned back to her prison was one marred with blood, all killing ash bones. The pinnacle of Kaguya's deadly will, the bones were capable of killing anybody with just a mere scratch. In the darkness of her void, it was impossible to detect the dozens of bone spears that she had thrown. Naruto had only survived due to simple luck. They had all missed him by a mere inch. Red spiraling eyes stared softly at the grave of his rival and friend. He could still remember the bloody sight of Sasuke dying in front of him, those fleeting words, and his promise to return home and change things for the better. Who would have thought that this would become the one time that he could not keep his promise? Wah wah. Naruto was snapped out of his stupor by the distinct sound of a child crying. He immediately found himself rushing towards the sound, hoping that it was as he had heard. To his surprise, in the middle of a clearing lay a blond boy no older than 6 years old. Naruto landed gracefully behind the boy, his Rinne Sharingan narrowed slightly, wondering if this place was playing tricks on him again. Hello, Naruto said. The young child spun around, hands stretched outwards in a fashion that looked comical but nonetheless proved to show that he was far from helpless. Naruto's truth-seeking balls instantly wrapped around his body as powerful rays of energy shot out from the heavens and zoomed towards him with impossible accuracy. They blew his shield apart. He was forced to substitute himself with a rock to get out of the blast zone that literally atmosied everything in its way. What is Kami's name was this boy? He had never seen a child wield that much power. Naruto raised his hand in surrender before he could be assaulted once more. Hey, I'm not here to hurt you. He heard the boy sniffle slightly and Naruto made his way cautiously to him. Are you okay? Home, I want to go home, he said softly. Can you take me home, mister? Naruto, I'm Naruto. He gave the boy his outstretched hand, which he took gratefully. What's your name? Franklin Richards, he whimpered out. How did you get here, Franklin? Naruto asked. I was just trying to show my dad I could control my powers, Naruto sighed. So he ended up here by accident and now he couldn't escape as well. Great. How would he break it the boy that there was no escaping here? Come on. Naruto relented. It's too dangerous out here, Franklin snorted, completely affronted by the comment that there was anything more powerful than he was. I'm the strongest, Franklin huffed. No one can. Naruto immediately grabbed Franklin as the earth below them shattered. Fire rose from the ground like a geyser and a deep guttural roar echoed from the depths below. Naruto and Franklin landed some clicks away from the large crater. Steam and smoke obscured their vision, but they could still feel its presence. Clap clap. Imagine my surprise when I sensed a reality warper in my dimension, a pale green-haired man dressed like some sort of jester with a cape. The man's face was permanently twisted in a sort of sickening smile. And a young child. Nonetheless, I couldn't possibly resist not revealing myself. He laughed maniacally. Green fire danced around his body as he raised one of his bony hands. The world shifted. The entity immediately appeared in front of them. Naruto's tried to kick him, but his body just phased through. He fired a powerful psionic blast that sent Naruto spiraling away. Franklin murmured, "Nightmares, you're not real." "Oh, but I am very much real," the apparition cackled, "and you are going to be mine." Franklin felt his body freeze as the man's eyes glowed with power. He could feel the entity enter his mind. He tried his best to fight against the powerful telepathic attack but to no avail. Franklin's body had been consumed by the ethereal flame of the apparition-like entity. The entity in Franklin's body stretched his new body, testing it out. not quite as steady as I had hoped, but it will do quite nicely." He turned towards Naruto, a mocking smile played on his lips. "And you failed once more, Uzumaki. I'm not surprised really. After all this time, you had yet to truly understand what this place is." Naruto growled, "I don't care." His chakra exploded outwards as he took on his Sage of Six Paths mode. "Get out of the kid or I will kill you." Franklin sneered, "Such power. It's quite sad that you already have that infernal fox inside your stomach, otherwise you would have made a great host." He raised his hand. The Raisin Shuriken heading towards him was simply willed out of my existence. Naruto had never seen anything like it. 1 second it was there and the next it was gone. Franklin raised his hand. Time froze. Franklin approached Naruto's prone form. "It's unfortunate that you must die." He conjured one of his blades and stabbed straight into Naruto's heart before he allowed time to resume once more. Blood pooled out of Naruto's mouth as he gasped in surprise. Runes spread out from the blade and across his body. He felt his body begin to shut down. His healing factor was useless against the possessed Franklin's warping powers. He grinned bloodily as his Rinna Sharingan spun one last time before his body crumbled to the ground, dead. Franklin drew his blade from Naruto's chest. He gave the Uzumaki one castaway look. Nothing could defeat him in this body. The other lords would not stand a chance against him. Soon, Nightmare would rule the underworld and then, he would go on to rule the entire universe. "Where are you going?" Franklin heard the softest of whispers behind him. He spun around to see him staring at the hateful gaze of Uzumaki Naruto. He couldn't possibly react in time as Naruto's palm slammed straight into his stomach. Chakra pulsed into his body and Naruto activated the Yang seal. The possessed Franklin screamed in pain. How? Naruto grinned foxily. "Guess you made an error allowing me to fight all your creatures all these years. I've become accustomed to dealing with ghosts like you." Nightmare screamed in anguish as Naruto's Yang seal forcefully excavated him from Franklin's body. Naruto's Rinna Sharingan spun wildly. The apparition turned towards Franklin's unconscious body and began to fly towards it, intent on possessing him once more. Fuinjutsu, Uchukusari Tesso. Naruto slammed his hands together as he completed the technique. Nightmare felt a powerful tug as dozens of ethereal blue chains shot out from beneath Naruto's feet. He tried to cut them down but they kept multiplying, attaching themselves to his body. Nightmare felt himself being dragged by adamantine-like chains. Naruto grabbed the large scroll strapped to his back and unwound it, revealing a dense and complicated seal array. "You will pay for this, Uzumaki. I will return," the entity screamed as he was swallowed into the seal in the scroll. Naruto had no doubt that the being would escape eventually, but his primary concern was Franklin. Franklin looked at Naruto with wonder. "Can you teach me how to do that when we get back home?" Naruto shook his head in amusement at how quickly the boy had just shaken off being possessed. The world began to shake rapidly. Franklin let out a cry as he fell to the ground once more. He knew this feeling well. It was the beginning of a dimensional shift. The realm was beginning to break apart without its ruler, and soon both Franklin and Naruto found themselves blinded by a powerful white light. Franklin closed his eyes and used all of his willpower to wish that he was back with his parents. Dr. Strange prided himself in being the master of all that was arcane. It was after all his duty as Earth Sorcerer Supreme to ensure that the mystical never interfered with the mundane. His power and expertise were sought all over the planet. If there was ever anything magical going on, he was the guy to call. "What do you mean, you can't find him?" Susan Storm shouted angrily. "Whatever took him was mystical in nature." Dr. Strange sighed. "It is impossible to detect a reality warper, Susan, and your son vanished off his own accord." Reed Richards hummed, "And what of your magical instruments? Do they not give you the whereabouts of our son?" The Sorcerer Supreme sighed. "Such rituals take time. We must have patience." Susan wasn't having any of it. Her son could be lost in the middle of nowhere and they weren't doing anything. Johnny Storm gently held his sister and whispered words of encouragement. "He's going to be fine, Sue. Remember, we're dealing with Franklin here." It did little to soothe her worries, but Susan calmed down a little. The sanctum chimed. Dr. Strange felt a powerful wave of demonic magic erupt from the orb of Agamotto. This wasn't good. It could only mean that something major had happened in one of the dimensions belonging to the Hell Lords. He rushed towards the orb, only to find himself stunned at what he saw. By the mists of Hoggoth, how is such a thing possible? He questioned. The dream dimension had been shattered completely. Someone or something had managed to defeat Nightmare in his own world. And they were coming straight here. A multicolored rift blew apart in the middle of the room, a blinding light spread throughout the room forcing them all to cover their eyes. Doctor Strange raised a barrier in time as he felt a sudden spike in energy. Two figures were spat out of the rift at high velocity. He heard them groan in pain as they collided against the invisible barrier. The light eventually died down, revealing who the two intruders were. Susan Storm was the first to notice that one of them was Franklin. Franklin! She shouted and rushed towards her son. Franklin opened up his eyes at the unforgettable voice of his mother. He smiled brightly. Yes, I did it, Naruto, he exclaimed. Susan scooped him up from Naruto's arms, smiling and hugging her son. Oh, thank God, Franklin, you had us worried. She stared at him sternly. Don't ever do that again. Franklin nodded tearily. Is Mr. Naruto okay, Mommy? He asked. Susan peeked over her son's shoulder to see the unconscious form of the teen. He saved me from the monster. Gasp. Naruto let out a strangled gasp for air. His mind spun wildly from the spiraling effect of interdimensional travel. Son of a bitch. Never again, I'm never doing that again. As he came to, he found himself in the presence of four bizarrely dressed people and an orange rock-like being. Who are you people and where am I? He demanded, his chakra flexed outwards in an intimidating fashion. It was moments like this that made Doctor Strange hate his job. Naruto frowned intensely as he sat comfortably in the presence of one Sorcerer Supreme and the Fantastic Four. He had apparently arrived in a different world, not surprising considering that Franklin didn't at all appear as if he had come from the elemental nations. Doctor Strange had been the first to greet him, casting a quick charm on him so that they could all understand each other. They had told him who they were, where he was and what had happened to him. Naruto had apparently been trapped in a dream dimension. Doctor Strange had said that it could only be assessed through the astral plane and that it was a freak accident that his physical form had gotten trapped there. In return, he had told them everything. Or at least as much as he was comfortable with revealing. He told them where he had come from, how he had been trapped in that hellhole for more than a lifetime and how Franklin and he had escaped. So I can't go back home? Naruto asked. Reed Richards said, traveling between different universes is very risky, especially without knowing where you are going. It's like rolling a dice. Only the amount of universes in the multiverse are infinite. So the chances of you landing in your universe is almost zero, and without exact coordinates, even if you did somehow reach your universe, the chances you'll just be floating around in space. Reed thought it was better to keep quiet about how even if Naruto landed back home, it was more than likely that he would end up in the distant future rather than at the time that he had left it. Naruto buried his face in his hand and let out a tired and weary sigh. Then it was all for nothing. Reed nodded. I'm sorry, I can't be of more help. Susan nudged her husband and Reed quickly added, whilst I cannot give you what you seek, all I can give you is a place to stay until you become more accustomed to life on this world. Johnny Storm nodded. It's totally cool with me. Anybody who saves my nephew is good in my book. Franklin jumped up and down excitedly. And you can show me how you did that thing with your eyes? Susan Storm looked at her son with amusement. She had never seen him so excited to learn something, though she was also certainly intrigued by this new addition's power set. Doctor Strange sat silently, judging the boy in front of him with intense scrutiny. Barely older than 17, Naruto Uzumaki had been through enough suffering to last 100 lifetimes. The fact that he had not gone insane from it all was a miracle in itself. Strange couldn't imagine anybody lasting in the dream dimension for that long without losing themselves to nightmares games. A part of him feared that he was letting someone who could potentially pose a huge threat to them into their world. The boy was reluctant to give them any historical context of his land beside a brief rundown. He had come from a place called the Elemental Nations. The dimension was run down with war and strife. It was primitive and militaristic as opposed to this world. From what little information that he had been given, it was easy to surmise that Naruto had been trained from a very young age, a weaponized child soldier that knew nothing besides to fight. Naruto's eyes flickered towards the silent sorcerer. He knew that look well. He had seen all the time on the old man Tsuchikage's face. I know what you're thinking, Naruto said. You're wondering if I am a threat to your world? He made no indication to answer, but Naruto could surmise by the sorcerer's grimace. I don't blame you or anything. I'd probably do the same if I was Hokage. The answer is no, I'm not a threat to you or your world. You may not believe this, but I'm tired of fighting even if it's all I know. Doctor Strange merely nodded. His magic sensed no deception from him. Johnny Storm slapped his hands together. Good, great, let's get going then, I'm bored, and all of these artifacts give me the creeps. He shuddered as he stared at the skull on the desk that had green mist billowing out of its mouth. The Fantastic Four and Franklin began to make their way out of the room. Doctor Strange said, I will continue to research how you ended up in the dream dimension. Perhaps it may lead to a way you can get back home. Naruto gave the sorcerer a thankful nod and headed out of the room. Oh, before I forget, he threw a scroll towards Doctor Strange. You can start by asking the demon. Doctor Strange appeared stupefied at the prospect that an entity like Nightmare could be sealed in a flimsy piece of paper. He wondered how the world would react to the presence of a new superpower. Once the young Uzumaki stepped out of the sanctum, there would be no stopping the world from sensing his presence. That vast amount energy brimming within in the boy was akin to a vast ocean. All around the world and beyond, they felt Naruto's power as he took his first step into this new world. Charles Xavier awoke abruptly to the blaring alarms of Cerebro. The machine created to detect mutants had been specifically designed to pick up signatures through his telepathy. On occasion, however, it would set itself off in the presence of a large enough mutant signature. The professor frowned slightly at the sound of the alarm. The last time something like this had happened was Jean. Professor, there was a brief rap at his door before he was greeted by the presence of one of his most trusted companions. Aurora Monroe aka Strom stood by the door, a tight grimace playing open her lips. How bad? He inquired. You're going to want to see for yourself, Storm replied whilst walking over to his side. She helped the professor up and into his wheelchair. Logan and Hank are already there, and I've instructed the students to stay in their rooms. Thank you, Aurora. She grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and they began to make their way down to the room containing Cerebro. The machine was located in the basement, far into the left wing where nobody actually ventured and was seemingly always somehow safe from the constant barrage of attacks that befall the manor. Aurora came to a stop in front of the door, allowing for the biometric scanner to finish scanning them. Accepted. 00 Professor X, 01 Storm. A metallic voice echoed throughout the hallway. They heard a soft creak and the door slide open. Aurora escorted him into the hollow chamber. Cerebro was currently situated in the middle being tinkered with by the resident genius, Beast. The professor spoke. Report. Logan growled, Beast saying that it was a false reading. Aurora grimaced. She had never heard of such a thing happening. Is such a thing possible, Professor? I'm afraid not, my dear, Xavier replied. Mutant signatures are distinct compared to other superhumans. Cerebro was designed specifically to detect them. He stared at the large blurry furry form of Beast dangling from the ceiling. Noticing their presence, Beast flipped himself over and landed in front of them. Cerebro detected a signature, however it's unlike any I've ever seen. Beast fiddled with his glasses as he passed a tablet over to the professor. Charles hummed to himself whilst he read the contents. This was indeed very interesting. Well, let's see if we can locate the source. He rolled towards the machine and placed Cerebro upon his head. He closed his eyes, allowing the voices of billions of people to flow through him. His mind traveled throughout the city of New York until he located the source, a teenager around the same age as Jean. He sent a soft probe to try and investigate who this entity was, only to find himself hitting an impenetrable mental barrier. Xavier winced in pain from the impact. He could feel an immense amount of energy humming in the astral plane. Purple eyes spun hatefully. Get out of my head. Charles' astral self was consumed by a wave of energy. His actual body began to jolt and seize from it all. Aurora removed the helmet in a hurry. Are you all right? The professor nodded, slowly trying to regain his mental bearings. What kind of assault was that? He wasn't sure, but it certainly wasn't telepathic. Logan asked, what happened? Charles frowned. It's definitely a mutant, but I fear I may have just left a bad impression on the young man. Is he in any danger? Aurora said. He's in safe hands, for now. We shall speak to him come another time. I must go converse with an old friend. Logan and Aurora were both interested who this new mutant was to leave such an impression on the normally stoic professor. Naruto had never seen buildings this tall in his life nor this many people in one place. It was almost surreal that such a place could exist. Konoha had boasted a population of around 100,000. This little portion of the city held more people than the entire Land of Fire. This is us, Reed spoke as they came to a halt in front of a rather tall building. Naruto asked in slight amazement, you own all of this? Johnny smirked. Just the top 5 floors. Naruto jumped back slightly as Johnny's whole body caught on fire. See you guys there. Naruto watched as he streaked across the sky like a comet, a part of him wondering how fire could give someone the ability to fly. The thing grunted, always the show-off. The group headed upstairs by some sort of metal contraption that Naruto had never seen before. It was intriguing how humans in this world had developed technology to make up for their lack of power, reminding him of the time he went to the land of snow and fought against those snow shinobi with their elaborate chakra suits. The elevator pinged and opened slowly. Naruto was greeted to a rather lavish foyer with all sorts of expensive-looking ornaments and technological gadgets whose function he couldn't fathom. Reed said, "Susan, why don't you show Naruto his room? I have some research that I have to do." Susan rolled her eyes but made no effort to argue with her husband. "Come on Naruto, I'll show you to your room." They all left the elevator except Reed, who headed up to his laboratory to no doubt explore his ideas. Susan leads him through a series of corridors towards the apartment complex portion of the building. "This is your room, Naruto." She gave him a bright smile. "You can stay as long as you want whilst you try to get yourself adjusted to life here." "Thank you," he replied softly. Entering his room, he was surprised to see that it was indeed rather spacious, and it even had a bathroom attached to it, but before he could explore there was something that he needed to do. He sat in the middle of the room in a lotus form. As he entered his mindscape, he came across the gated door that held Kurama. The fox had been in an induced slumber ever since he had entered the dream dimension. Nightmare definitely lived up to his name. He had managed to keep Kurama stuck in a dream loop. Ever hear a bijou whimper? Naruto shuddered just thinking about what could make Kurama so afraid. He allowed his chakra to filter into the seal and with one sudden burst dispelled the weak green mist surrounding Kurama. Red eyes flew open and the Kyuubi let out a gargantuan roar. "I'm going to kill you." He started swiping all over the place, perhaps still believing that he was still in the dream sequence. "Kurama," Naruto said. The Kyuubi turned around to face his host, his eyes still weary from the eternally long nap. "What happened?" he asked. "All I remember was Kaguya sending us and that Uchiha bastard through a portal, and then," he growled, "where is that green-haired motherfucker? I want to skin him alive. I sealed him." The Kyuubi peered at Naruto, almost stepping back in shock as he saw his host wield the same eyes as his father. "You've missed a lot," he answered, knowing that Kurama didn't have to ask for an explanation. He could simply access his memories to view what happened to his slumber. "I'm sorry," Kurama said honestly. His host had suffered just as much as he had under the machinations of whatever that being was. "So, we're stuck here. What are you going to do?" Naruto gave a sad smile. "I have no idea. All I really wanted to be was Hokage. That had always been his main goal. It was cruel that fate ripped it away from him when he was so close. You could always go back to becoming a shinobi. Humans will never really run out of people to hire to do their dirty work," Kurama added. "I guess we'll see," Naruto replied. There was too much he didn't know about this place. In the short while that he arrived here, he met a kid who could make Kaguya's ability to warp reality appear infantile. A so-called sorcerer that could wield magic and a group of 4 superpowered individuals. This world wasn't just much larger than his own, it was more complex and at first sight seemed much more dangerous. Kurama huffed, "How dull. I wish you could have kept that demon for yourself. I wanted to see how much it enjoys getting tortured." Naruto deadpanned, "It's literally a ghost. How can you torture a ghost?" Kurama let out a grunt of acknowledgement. He slipped back into Naruto's mindscape, needing some rest to get himself back to 100%, "Whilst you decide what you want to do in this new world. I'll be asleep, don't wake me up unless you're about to die." Naruto let out a slight yawn as he let sleep take him as well. "Naruto, wake up." Blue eyes fluttered open and, in an instant, gripped the hand that was trying to shake him awake before engaging in a maneuver that put the assailant in a chokehold. It all happened so quickly that Susan was unable to do anything about. She tapped his arms in alarms as she choked into his hold. "Naruto!" the thing shouted. Naruto looked down to see Susan struggling under his grip. He immediately let her go, looking almost scared that he almost killed her. I'm so sorry," he repeated as he let Susan go. Susan gasped slightly for air but appeared otherwise fine. She stood up carefully, giving an apologetic glance at Naruto. "It's all right," she said softly, still somewhat anxious about what had just transpired. "I was just going to tell you that breakfast was ready." Why were these people being so nice to him? He could be a threat, heck, he almost killed one of them. The thing grimaced tightly. He knew a solider when he saw one. The signs were there, tight form, always on alert and PTSD. Naruto had all of them. He was sure Susan sensed it too. Susan leaned down. It's going to be okay, Naruto, you're not stuck there anymore. She placed a stack of clothes by his bedside. Freshen up, then come and eat, I'm sure you're craving some real food. She and the thing left the room, leaving him in his thoughts. Naruto eventually went downstairs, dressed in a pair of clean clothes that Susan had provided him. Johnny Storm grinned, so Sleeping Beauty is finally awake. You've been asleep for 2 days. Reed peered up from his book. He said, it's a common side effect from dimensional travel. Naruto wondered why they weren't talking about what had just happened. He would have thought Johnny and Reed would outright attack him. A quick glance at Susan gave him all the answers he needed. The language spell that strange cast on you is going to wear out soon. Reed informed Naruto, we're going to have to get you up to speed. Naruto grinned, that's no problem for me. I can learn it all by tonight. They looked at him as if he was insane. There weren't many people that were capable of learning an entire language in the span of a few hours, Reed being one of them. Naruto did a cross with his hands and in a plume of smoke. They were greeted to an exact clone of him. I can make thousands of clones and after they die, I get all of their memories and experiences. Fascinating, Reed murmured, so you have some sort of empathetic and telepathic link to your clones. Do you feel pain when they die? Naruto shook his head. Reed's eyes gained an odd gleam that made Naruto gulp. Give me 24 clones and I'll get you up to the same level as people your age. Johnny laughed, you're so screwed dude, Reed's gonna put your clones through the ringer. Ben nodded, you're definitely going to regret telling Stretch that Whiskers. Naruto shrugged, they had to be exaggerating. Besides being taught by what Strange called this world's greatest mind was a privilege that he simply couldn't pass up. Susan added, meanwhile, Johnny can take you out to explore the city and hopefully buy some new clothes. I'll go with, Ben said, I don't trust you not to mess with the kid, Johnny. And do make sure that he's presentable. Susan glared at her brother, that means no orange. Both Naruto and Johnny said at the exact time, what's wrong with orange? Reed replied, nothing, Susan is just upset about the time Johnny took Franklin shopping and bought him all orange clothes. Susan simply huffed indignation as she headed out of the room, leaving the rest to chuckle at her behavior. Johnny nudged Naruto and whispered, if we move fast enough, we can ditch the big rock. Can he fly? Naruto said cheekily. Johnny simply grinned. By the time it was time for them to leave, Ben was greeted to speeding jets of fire streak through the air. He sighed, I should have known. Then again, at least, he got to relax without Johnny trying to hog the TV. Shopping was boring. He knew that already, but without the exciting prospect of looking and browsing over new weapons and shinobi tools, it seemed to be even more mind-numbing and drudging. It also seemed like Johnny Storm was a literal celebrity. People would flock to him every few minutes asking for selfies on these tiny electrical devices called phones. It was almost afternoon when they exited the mall. Johnny said, so we'll drop these off back home and then we can go to the Knicks game. Knicks? Naruto questioned. They're a sports team. Naruto was slightly excited. He wanted to see how well the people on this earth fought. You're gonna love basketball. It's where two teams face off and they have to try and get the ball into the hoop. Whoever has the most points wins. Forget it. This planet was boring. Flame on. Johnny caught a blaze before he took off into the air. Naruto followed straight behind. The two of them flew straight through the city, turning through several different buildings as they made their way back to the Baxter building. Naruto immediately sensed a powerful wave of negative emotion. He turned around in time to dodge a powerful sonic wave. The wave hit Johnny square straight in the chest, sending hurtling down into the ground. Naruto dove straight down, landing effortlessly beside the groaning Human Torch. Are you okay? He asked. Johnny nodded. It surprised me is all. He looked around the street but to no avail. It was as if his attacker wasn't there. Behind! Naruto shouted. They both dove out of the way in time as an even greater sonic blast slammed into the pavement. I'm back, a metallic voice echoed loudly. Johnny's eyes widened when he saw the unmistakable sonic cannon of Ulysses Claw. Wondering how I'm still alive, Torch. Claws made his way towards them. He flicked his sonic converter against the wall, amplifying the sound till it reached a screeching peak. Let's just say, I got an upgrade. And I'm here to get my revenge, Claw said, angrily. The Human Torch took off. Flames flew straight at Claw, who simply stood there and allowed it to burn him to no effect. Claw laughed. Do you not understand? I am beyond human, I have become pure sound, unkillable, untouchable, I am supreme. You're insane, Johnny said angrily. He increased the heat of his flame blast. Claw simply raised his sound converter and fired another sonic blast. Johnny managed to dodge it, but his equilibrium was knocked off balance as it ruptured his eardrum. Claw turned in amusement as the whisker-faced teenager threw several blades at his chest only for them to phase through. Naruto groaned in annoyance. Why do so many of you bastards have ghost-like powers? Naruto cast a sideways glance at Johnny, who was struggling to keep himself standing as Claw pointed his sonic weapon at him, intent on finishing him off whilst he was weak. Naruto appeared in front of Claw. His kick blew apart his aim, sending his arm upwards just before he fired his sonic beam. Naruto appeared impressed as the beam cut across the sky like a comet. He was sure that even he would struggle if he had hit by it. The Human Torch finally regained his balance. His flames burned brighter and hotter as he grew angrier. Naruto said, "Stop, Johnny, we can't win this by fighting him head-on." Johnny was curious to see what the young upstart had to say. "You have a plan?" he asked. "No," Naruto admitted. "Well, kind of. How long can you keep him distracted?" "As long as necessary." The flaming torch set out into the air, whistling loudly and drawing Claw's attention as he flew around in circles. Claw angrily began to fire dozens of his sonic waves that put several bus-sized holes into the neighboring buildings. Johnny shouted, "Naruto, get a move on, he's going to bring down the whole street." Naruto's Rinne had picked up on interesting detail that Claw had to maintain physical form whilst he was firing his sonic blasts. Naruto rushed forwards. His fingers danced as he sped through several seals. "Here goes nothing. Hayaten Hayakaso." He slammed his hands into the ground and Claw was consumed by a huge piece of ice. The ice appeared incredibly dense and as tall as a miniature skyscraper. Johnny whistled. "Talk about overkill, you damn well froze the whole street." His flame body kept him warm from the absolute nipping temperature. Naruto, however, was watching the ice with increased concentration. It's not over yet. The purpose of the ice was to slow him down. He knew that Claw would escape, but he needed him slower if he was going to defeat him. A loud screeching vibration shocked the earth beneath them. The ice cracked and then there was a long pause that made both of them wonder if Claw had expended his energy. The mountain of ice and snow shattered like a piece of glass. Claw said victoriously, "Your ice wasn't cold enough to stop sound." An icy mist blocked his vision. He raised his weapon as he heard the brief shuffling of feet. Claw stomped on the ground and used the sound to try and echolocate their location in the mist. Behind him, the ice had slowed him down. He couldn't react in time as Naruto's palm slammed into his chest. Gakido. Claw felt a powerful pull from his body as his energy began to seep out of him and into Naruto. He screamed in veritable pain as his form began to flicker. I will not be defeated." Naruto watched in fascination as Claw simply dispersed, unable to hold his physical form any longer. The Human Torch asked anxiously, "Did you kill him?" Naruto shrugged. "He's made out of energy. I'm not sure he can be killed. He'll probably reform somewhere." The Bijou were literally the same thing. They couldn't die because they were made up of chakra. He guessed Ulysses' Claw was the same thing, just with sound. As the mist cleared, Naruto quickly became privy to the number of people that had come to film the fight. Johnny gave the cameras his signature boyish smile. "Smile, you're a celebrity now, Naruto." "I'd rather not," Naruto muttered. "Well, it's too late, everyone's gonna be talking about the new phenom in town." "Great, just great." He could already hear them whispering about him. Perhaps he should have bought a mask. Naruto didn't give them the time to take more shots as he blasted into the air, heading towards the Baxter building. Johnny gave the media a final salute and kiss before he flew off as well, quickly joining Naruto. He grinned, "Won a race. Think you can keep up with me?" Johnny was almost thrown to the ground by a sonic boom as Naruto sped across the sky. Cocky little brat. The Human Torch was like a trailing ember to Naruto's golden light. He landed on the roof annoyed when he saw Naruto simply just leaning against the wall. "You sure took your time." Johnny raised his hand in surrender. Okay, you got me." They headed inside only to be greeted by a fuming Susan Storm. "I tell you to do one thing and what do? You decide to get a fight with Claw and practically destroy a street," she said to her brother. Johnny replied, "Calm down sis, it's not like we went out looking for a fight, Claw just came out of nowhere." Naruto nodded, confirming her story. Susan sighed, realizing that there really wasn't anything she could do. Reed is downstairs. Naruto, you have a guest waiting for you. Naruto entered the living room, his eyes narrowed as he felt the familiar presence from a few days ago. Mr. Uzumaki, a bald man in a wheelchair, greeted him. He was flanked by a burly feral-looking man and an attractive dark-skinned woman who looked a lot like Mabui with her white hair. Naruto growled, "You're that guy who tried to enter my mind." "I apologize for that," the bald man said. "I meant no disrespect, but I had to be sure that you were indeed a mutant." "Mutant?" Naruto questioned. "Tell me, have you noticed anything odd happening to you lately?" Xavier nodded towards Logan and the feral man grunted in annoyance as 3 metal claws erupted from his hand. "I'm sure you have already figured my power set. Logan here has the ability to regenerate quickly and use adamantium quickly." He pointed towards the white-haired woman. "This is Ororo. She can control the weather." Naruto was mildly impressed. He had never met anybody who could do that. Kaguya had something similar, but all she was doing was warping her dimension. Naruto released a tiny amount of his chakra. Xavier and his guests immediately grew weary as they felt themselves getting weighed down by the energy's sheer density. "That is my chakra. Everyone on my planet has it." It was technically true. Even civilians possessed chakra, even if it was so minute they couldn't really do anything with it. Xavier was taken aback slightly that Naruto wasn't from this earth, though to his credit, he recovered rather quickly. Cerebro has never been wrong. There have been cases of mutants from parallel Earths coming to ours. Reed clarified for his friend, "I scanned one of your clones just to be sure. It appears that you do indeed possess a variant of the mutant gene. In your universe, were they any sort of powers that were hereditary family related?" Xavier asked. Naruto nodded. "There are called bloodline limits back home. Certain clans had abilities that only they could use. It's not known how it happened. The Uchiha, Senju and Uzumaki all got their power from being direct descendants of the Rikudo Sennin. He guessed the Hyuga as well since Kaguya had a Byakugan, but the other clans. He had no idea how the other clans developed bloodline limits, though he wouldn't be surprised if all bloodlines did come from Kaguya. It explained why he could use elemental Kekai Genkai like Haku's Hayatan. Reed pondered on it for a while. They're all linked to chakra. I don't think the X gene would manifest in such a way. There would be no selection pressure to create such a mutation in the first place. Charles agreed. "It is a rather unique situation, I must say." He turned to Naruto. "And you are sure you have never experienced anything besides using this chakra of yours?" Naruto nodded impatiently. He was getting bored with this conversation. Ororo intervened, seeing Naruto's irritated expression. "The professor runs a school to train mutants in using their power and prepare them for the real world. We came here to see if you were interested in joining." Reed added, "A lot of the students are around your age. It may be an opportunity to have some normalcy." Naruto, however, got the feeling that Xavier wasn't preparing them to live a normal life. By the sounds of it, it sounded more like the Shinobi Academy. "What are you actually training them for?" Naruto asked evenly. Charles sighed. He could tell that Naruto would not be swayed unless he told him the full truth. Humankind has been at odds with mutants since the beginning of time. They fear that they are going to be wiped out if we are allowed to grow. The Xavier Institute is a sanctuary where mutants can live, learn and develop their powers in peace. This was all very similar to what happened to his clan. In fear that Uzushiogakure would become a major power in the elemental nations, it was destroyed by a coalition of Kiri and Kyumo shinobi. "You should go, brat," Kurama growled from his mind. "It's better than simply sitting around all day. Besides, we both know you can't help not helping people in need, and by the sounds of it, these kids are in for a rude awakening when it all goes to hell." "Very well, Professor, I accept your offer," Naruto agreed, if only out of intrigue and semi-boredom. Charles smiled. "Welcome to the X-Men, my boy. Who would have thought that using clones to mass info dump would hurt so much? I told you that you would end up regretting it." Johnny chuckled at Naruto's current predicament. Naruto winced in pain. He could barely move his head without getting a splitting headache, and Johnny's inability to shut his gob for a few seconds was not helping. "I thought the Cyclops warned you about using your clones this way." Kyubi growled loudly, though Naruto could tell that he was finding his suffering amusing. "I thought they were bluffing," Naruto groaned. "How was I supposed to know that he had developed a way to transfer information through neural networks?" Reed had literally force-fed all of his clones' information using some sort of machine, though he now knew a lot more about this world than he did before. This world was no different than his own: war, strife, poverty. It was all the same, nothing had changed. And nothing ever will, the QB reminded him. Father was naive to believe in peace. Humans are too prideful to admit their flaws, too short-sighted to care about anything but themselves, too quick to draw arms against those who are different than them. Naruto snorted. Sure, true peace may never be achieved, but things can be improved. His eyes hardened slightly. Rikudojiji's vision was simply that. He believed in a world where people didn't use chakra to fight wars but for the betterment of humanity. The Shinobi Alliance was a step in the right direction. He just hoped that people back home didn't regress back to the way things were. Charles asked, "Who were you speaking to?" Naruto nursed his head as he peeked over at the bald telepath. "Stop reading my thoughts," Naruto growled. Charles smiled genially. "You mistake me when you are speaking to the entity in your body. You are projecting your thoughts out loud similar to how we are speaking. I don't need to read your mind to hear them." "The professor is the strongest telepath on Earth," Storm added. "He has a hard time not hearing stray thoughts." Truthfully, Naruto didn't know much about mind reading, in general. The Yamanaka clan were gifted at mind-body techniques, but from what little he had seen from Xavier, he was hundreds of times stronger than they were. Xavier rolled towards him. "If I may." Naruto nodded briefly, wondering what the man wanted. Xavier tapped Naruto's temples gently and Naruto felt an instant relief wash over him as the headache simply faded out of existence. "What the?" Naruto grimaced as he felt the professor's mind meld with his own. A bombardment of disjointed memories entered the telepath's mind and the man grimaced at how broken apart and fractured his mind was. He had seen a brief glimpse into Naruto's tragic past, how he had been forced to contain a powerful beast and to endure the hatred of his village, how he had been ripped from his home and into nightmares, sickening games. Xavier knew then and there that Naruto was what he needed. He was what the students needed, if they were to survive what was coming. The X-Men needed to become much stronger. "What did you do?" Naruto thought angrily. He could still feel the man's presence inside his head, filtering through his mind. Charles replied, "I adjusted the flow of information into your brain, so it didn't overwhelm you." He peered over at the others. "Don't worry, I won't tell anybody what I saw." Naruto gave him a thankful smile. If letting Xavier, a tiny peek into his past, was what it cost to get rid of that blasted headache, so be it. Besides, he was going to have to end up revealing it at some point. It didn't really matter so much as when but who, and Xavier appeared to be a trusting individual. Xavier and Storm watched as Naruto unwrapped a small portion of the large scroll on his back, placing all of the clothes that he bought onto the center of the seal. He made a motion with his hand and the clones disappeared in a puff of smoke. "I'm ready to go," Naruto said, peeking up at the two mutants who appeared agape by his display. "What?" Ororo asked. "How?" "It's just paper," Naruto explained. "The paper is just a medium. The items are sent to alternative space until I call upon them." Ororo still didn't understand how such a thing was possible with just a bit of ink and paper, but Xavier, who was at least somewhat familiar with Naruto's world, simply nodded in understanding. She asked, "And this energy of yours allows you to accomplish such things?" Naruto nodded. "Chakra is in its simplest form a combination of physical and spiritual energy. The energy can be used to perform different types of things like manipulating the elements, enhance your body, cast illusions, and of course create seals." Ororo muttered to herself, "What an unfair ability." Naruto chuckled somewhat. "You've clearly never met Franklin." He gestured for the boy who was busy playing PlayStation. Franklin appeared in front of them in an instant. "Franklin, do you mind showing Ororo here what your power is?" The boy smirked. He snapped his finger and in front of him materialized a large key-like blade. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the questionable weapon but watched as Franklin swung the keyblade down, allowing for a blade of light to arc towards Storm. Franklin said excitedly, "I got this from the game I was playing. Pretty cool, right?" Naruto nodded. It was definitely an interesting weapon to say the least. Franklin eventually dispersed the blade and headed back to the sofa to continue playing his game. Xavier said, "He's gotten better." "You know him, Professor?" Storm asked. Charles nodded. "Cerebro detected Franklin when he was a baby, Reed and I had to work together to stop him from tearing reality apart." He shuddered just thinking about the many times he had been transfigured by baby Franklin. It was a very unpleasant experience, to say the least. Franklin possesses the very rare talent to warp reality. He is by far the strongest mutant on the planet. he peered towards Naruto, though I would say your energy readings would indicate that you are a close third. Close? Naruto wondered. Yes, I have a student in my school whose energy readings were very similar to your own. I fear it's as a result of the entity within her. Storm frowned. It was the first time that she was hearing of this issue. Naruto hummed in interest. How did you seal the entity? It can't be sealed. I simply created several mental blocks in her mind to stop her from accessing it, he said sadly. I didn't want to, of course, but her power is so volatile that she would rip herself apart by using its power. I'll see if I can create a seal to either remove it from her or allow for an easier way to access its power without killing herself, Naruto said, though he was excited to meet the woman who the professor had claimed was stronger than him. Charles, Naruto, and the professor turned to see a fuming Ororo. The wind causally rippled around her. How could you keep this a secret? The telepath said. It wasn't something that you needed to worry about. Naruto understood that Charles had only told him because he believed that he could help him in his predicament. If you're all done with the chit-chat, Logan growled as he got up from the table. Let's go. Ben said snidely, you're just angry that you lost at poker. Logan popped his claws out and pointed them at the thing's neck. Always the violent one, aren't ya? He stood up and the table flipped over. Ready to brawl with Wolverine. Fizz. An invisible barrier erupted between them. Can't you two go a few hours without fighting? Susan asked. TCH, you got saved this time, Grim. Right back at ya, the thing said cockily. Wolverine stalked out of the room whilst the thing busily celebrated winning $1,000 from his old-time buddy/rival. Naruto wondered, is he always so grouchy? Ororo said, yes, it's kind of his entire personality. Naruto chuckled at her little jab to her teammate. Seemed like both of them was headstrong enough that they would be at their necks. Xavier said, we should be on our way. He shook Reed's hand for his hospitality. You know Franklin is welcome at the academy anytime. Susan glared at the professor as he rolled out the door with Strom. She turned to Naruto, who finishing up what little he had yet to pack. Are you sure this is what you want, Naruto? Susan was worried about his mental state after what happened in the morning. She did not think it was wise to send him into another battlefield. If he joined the Xavier Academy, he would be forever branded as a mutant, and she had seen the horrors that such a label could cause. Ben came to Naruto's rescue. I'm sure Naruto can handle himself. Some familiarity won't hurt him. Thanks, big guy, Naruto said. He gave Susan a grin. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. Just make sure to visit from time to time. She accepted. Reed said, oh, he'll be over every week for private tutoring. Naruto growled. No way am I being subjected to that torture again. He grabbed his scroll and headed quickly out of the room. Reed shouted, don't forget, every Monday at 5, if you don't I'll tell Charles to not give you any ramen. Naruto froze at the blatant attempt at blackmail. Damned clones didn't know when to shut their mouths. Fine, he shouted back. He'd be damned if anything stopped him from having ramen. The Xavier Institute stood alone in the remote farmlands surrounding Worcester. It was around 3 stories tall and had 2 main wings attached to the main building. Naruto noted how the institute didn't appear to look anything like a school but rather a posh residency. Clever strategy, old man. Nobody would suspect your home to be a school. Logan snorted. I think you're giving Chuck too much credit. He just loves his mansion too much to change it. Naruto nodded as he admired the architecture. It was so much more different than the buildings were in his world, but it had an old-world feeling that resonated with him. Xavier replied, I admit I had never thought of such a strategy, but it wouldn't do much use regardless. The kids study at a school in the town. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He questioned the point of calling something a school if you never taught the students to begin with. The plane halted in the air as it hovered over the plain field of the mansion. The grass opened up into 2, revealing a sort of underground hangar. Naruto exited the jet once they had landed. He found himself in an enclosed metal hangar with several different types of jets and planes. Welcome back, Professor. A blue furry beast of a man jumped from one of the planes and landed in front of them. I trust your journey was most eventful. The beast peered over towards him. Naruto felt on edge as its eyes scoured all over his body. Xavier replied, yes Hank. Naruto here was the reason for Cerebro's weird behavior. Hank turned to see Naruto was busy pounding his fist against the hull of the X-Jet, intrigued as to how it functioned. Let's just say he's not from around here. Any idea about his mutant power? Hank asked. Xavier smirked. You'll have to see for yourself. He had no doubt that no mutant in this house could feasibly defeat Naruto, perhaps Jean or Rogue, but they were too inexperienced with their power. "Brat, stop damaging the jet," Logan growled as he saw Naruto had managed to put a dent in the hull of the X-jet. Naruto frowned at how weak the metal was. If just one tap could practically dent the metal, he figured he could wreck the whole thing with just a punch. He closed his eyes and channeled his chakra. Xavier's eyes widened in slight shock as the metal bent back to how it was. Naruto gave Logan an inquisitive look. "How much metal are you made of?" He had seen the man's metal claws, but it felt like his whole body was made up of metal. Logan's claws immediately popped out in anger. He asked, "Do you think that your claws would hurt me?" "Care to find out, bub?" Logan growled. Naruto teased, "Stress isn't good for your age, old man. I think you're already beginning to wrinkle." At that moment Logan wanted nothing more than to skewer the brat. He swiped at Naruto but found his body frozen mid-thrust. Now is that any way to welcome a guest? "Naruto, stop annoying Logan," Charles said. Naruto shrugged and stopped his jutsu, allowing Logan to fall to the ground. "Logan, please get all of the students in danger room." Logan asked, "For what?" "I want to test their progress," Charles said. "They will face Naruto." Naruto looked at the professor in surprise. He had no idea that the man was planning on such a drastic test. "Not that I don't mind a good fight, but why?" Naruto asked. "I was told you were an experienced fighter, perhaps even greater than Logan. The students may learn a thing or two from facing you." Charles answered. He looked over at Logan, who seemed affronted that his role was being usurped. To make things fair, Logan and Ororo will be joining them." Naruto grinned slightly. "Very well," he cranked his neck. "But only if I can take charge on the objectives." "What do you have in mind?" "All I'll need are 2 bells. Naruto explained his idea, which he totally did not steal from Kakashi-sensei. Naruto walked throughout the school alongside the professor, who was acting as his tour guide. He had seen many of the facilities, including his room, which he had to admit was incredibly spacious. It was definitely more luxurious than his apartment back home. During his time exploring, Naruto realized just how empty the institute was. There were maybe a dozen or so mutants in total here. Many of them were much younger than he was, and by the looks of it, they were much more interested in trying to size him up than greeting him. Charles said, "The only place that is left is the danger room. It's where we train our students." They delved deeper underground. Naruto wondered just how much of the school was built underground. It sure did seem like the majority of it was. Xavier came to a stop in front of a pair of teenagers. He smiled. "Scott, Jean, I'll like you to meet Naruto." Naruto peeked at the two of them with slight interest, considering the professor's reaction. He assumed that these two were his most prized students. Jean's eyes twinkled as she greeted him. "Nice to meet you, Naruto." She instinctively sent a gentle probe into his mind, but she was immediately overwhelmed by a powerful mental barrier. "Can't say the same," Naruto replied. "Jean, what have I told you about entering people's minds without their permission?" "Sorry, Professor." She gave Naruto an apologetic look, which he accepted somewhat begrudgingly. Jean couldn't help but stare at the teen in front of him. He seemed very tranquil, almost sage-like. He had a very unique appearance, to say the least. She wondered if he had cat-like power, considering those whisker marks on his cheeks. She was excited to see what he was capable of. Scott said, "Everybody is in the danger room as you asked, Professor." He gave Jean a small look and she nodded. "But today is a Sunday, it's supposed to be our day off." Charles smiled. "I'll give you the whole week off if you manage to finish today's training sequence." Jean and Scott looked surprised at the offer. The professor hardly ever offered them many days off from training. Scott, unlike Jean, who was pretty leaping at the opportunity, was suspicious as to what this training sequence entailed for the professor to be so confident. He asked, "And what is the training sequence?" The professor merely smiled, preferring to keep the objective a secret. He headed up the elevator towards the control room of the danger room, leaving Naruto to awkwardly stand beside Jean and Scott. Scott snorted as he gave Naruto a hard glare before he walked into the danger room. Jean smiled genially. "Come on, I'll show you the changing rooms." From his first step into the danger room, Naruto immediately wondered why it warranted such a name. It certainly did not feel like he was in any danger. The dome-shaped room was composed entirely of metal and appeared incredibly bare. In fact, the only thing in the room was a large metallic ball that hung onto the ceiling. "Welcome to the danger room, Naruto." Charles's voice echoed through several microphones sporadically spread around the room. he introduced Naruto to the students opposite from him, in addition to Scott and Jean. Naruto met Kitty, a petite brunette who had a penchant for saying like, Kurt who looked like a blue-furred devil and spoke in a weird foreign accent, and Ororo's vocal nephew Evan. Finally, there was Rogue, who had hidden in the back. She didn't at all seem interested in anything. Kitty asked, why do we have to fight him, can't he just go through a simulation? Charles echoed, this is as much a test for Naruto as it is for you. He pressed a button and a metal tentacle rushed towards Naruto. The boy's reaction was to simply grab it and rip straight from the ground. Besides, my machines won't do much against him, and I'd rather not cause such needless damage. They did cost a lot, and contrary to popular opinion, Charles wasn't made out of money. Rogue shrugged, let's just get this over with. No matter how strong this new mutant was, there was no way he could beat all of them, especially with Wolverine and Storm on their team. Evan looked at Naruto with slight suspicion. The teen looked increasingly familiar to him, like he had seen him somewhere. His eyes widened in shock. You. He pointed at Naruto and looked over at his friends. He's that guy on the news that was fighting with the Human Torch. Oh, we are so dead. Calm down, Evan, Ororo said to her nephew. There is no use getting scared before a fight. Ororo is correct, Charles echoed. The test is rather simple, Naruto, if you will. Naruto raised a pair of two small jingling bells that were tied to his pants. That is your objective, to pass the test. All you have to do is take the bells from Naruto. Kurt hopped around eagerly. Easy. He disappeared with a small bamf appearing all of a sudden underneath Naruto, hand outstretched as he reached for the bells. Naruto turned towards Nightcrawler. He grabbed his hand with a teasing grin. I didn't say start. Nightcrawler was hurled straight back towards the group. He landed straight onto Wolverine. Logan shoved Kurt off of him and launched himself towards Naruto, claws outstretched and eyes feral with rage. Naruto dodged several off Wolverine's clawed swipes. The man angrily growled at how comfortably Naruto was parrying and countering his attacks. Flum. Naruto jumped out of the way as a beam of red energy zoomed towards him. Logan looked up in slight surprise before he was hit straight in the chest by one of Scott's ocular blasts. Naruto appeared as a flicker beside Scott. You have really bad aim. Cyclops immediately turned and fired another beam towards him. Naruto simply made a motion with his hand, and Logan was struck by another one of Scott's blasts, sending him spiraling into the wall once more. Missed again, Naruto teased as he appeared where Logan previously was. Scott growled and fired several more energy beams towards Naruto, who expertly danced between them like they posed no threat to him. Really, I'm beginning to think that you might need stronger glasses, Naruto said as he appeared above him. Scott's visor glistened as he prepared to fire another beam, but Naruto was much faster than he was. Dynamic entry. The wind was knocked straight out of him as Naruto's flying kick landed straight into his diaphragm. Scott's body crunched harshly against the wall. The mutant teen groaned in intense pain. That kick had to have cracked a rib or two. Gotcha. Naruto felt two hands suddenly grab his feet and drag them under. Kitty's face slowly emerged from the ground as she rooted him into the ground. Jean now. He stared amusedly as Jean outstretched her hand. He felt a powerful pull from his midsection and the bells hurled straight towards Jean. Kitty smirked. We win. Whilst Naruto had been busy dealing with Logan and Scott, she and the other had formulated a foolproof way to obtain the bells without having to engage in direct combat, which they would quite clearly lose. Kitty felt a slight shift in Naruto's aura. Immense amounts of chakra poured out of him like a broken dam before it vanished altogether. He flexed. Boom. Kitty had to turn herself intangible as Naruto, in a show of pure strength and speed, blew apart the metal floor and dashed towards the hurling bells. Jean shouted, Kurt, get the bells now. Naruto frowned as Kurt teleported near the bells. The blue devil was too quick for him to use a substitution jutsu. Guess, he had no choice. Jean watched as Naruto's electric blue eyes turned sinister red. She heard him mutter something, and like before, Kurt's body was swapped with Naruto. He grabbed the bells and spun himself in midair. He pushed his palms outward and a torrent of lightning struck her. Jean let out a silent scream. Her body crumbled unconscious into the ground. Jean! Kurt shouted as he watched her fall. He teleported beside Naruto, intent on knocking him out. Naruto grabbed Kurt's kick. He gazed into the mutant's eyes. Sleep. Kurt felt his mind cloud and an irresistible fatigue overcome him. Naruto gently lowered the snoring mutant onto the ground. He grinned as he turned towards the remaining five. Who's next? Evan rushed towards him, bones sprouted out of his body and he fired them straight at Naruto. The bones were simply a distraction for Logan to attack him from behind. He slammed his hands together and a burst of ice erupted around him, encasing them both in a glacier. All that remained were Kitty, Rogue and Storm. Naruto suddenly jumped to his side as Kitty tried to grab from under once more. The same trick won't work me on again, though it was beginning to annoy him that he could not sense her in her intangible form. A beam of red energy erupted from underneath the ground and struck him straight in the chest. It wasn't for ya, Rogue said in her silky southern accent as she and Kitty arose from the ground like ghosts. Rogue raised her hand. Naruto immediately felt himself being flung towards her. I'll finish this quickly. She removed her glove. This will only hurt for a second. This girl. Naruto thought, she had the same power as Scott and Jean. No, she was using their power. He could practically feel their life force melding into her own. He couldn't allow himself to be touched. He allowed Rogue to drag him towards her using her telekinesis until he was mere inches away from her skin. Shinra Tensei. A small yet powerful gravitational burst erupted from Naruto. Kitty and Rogue were launched into opposing ends of the room, knocked unconscious by the sheer force of his attack. Naruto looked up at the floating Storm. It's just me and you now, Ororo. The woman sent several small lightning bolts towards him. Naruto noted just how lackluster her efforts were. I thought you could control the weather, Naruto inquired as he appeared suddenly behind Ororo. She swiped her hand and a gust of air blew towards him. He vanished once more. He appeared in front of her. Storm felt Naruto grab her by the hems of her uniform and thrown straight towards the ground. She managed to save herself by using air to cushion her fall. But all I'm seeing is a woman who is afraid of using her power. The air turned icy all of a sudden. Storm shoved her hand towards Naruto, directing the icy storm towards him. Naruto simply ran through a series of hand seals, Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu. He breathed in and expelled a ball of fire that was almost half the room in size. Ice met fire, the room exploded into 1,000 torrents of steam. Charles, shouldn't we stop the fight now? Beast asked worriedly. Both Storm and Naruto possessed powers that were too strong to contain in the danger room. He was also worried that their fight would lead to the other students getting hurt. The professor didn't choose to reply as he was more invested in watching Naruto fight his strongest student. The heavy steam was beginning to settle down, revealing an uninjured Naruto and Storm. He noticed the steam around Naruto begin to boil and froth until it reached a point where it exploded, and to his surprise, he sent a pillar of pressurized hot gas straight at Storm, who countered by raising an icy wall. Beast looked in wonder as Naruto and Storm danced in a hail of the elements, each of them using dissimilar elements to counter the other. The boy had thus far shown many different abilities. He listed them all in his mind: energy manipulation, spatial manipulation, elemental control, and he appeared to have superhuman strength, speed and agility. And he doubted that Naruto was even fighting with half of his power. Charles sighed. Looks like it's over. It was a landslide victory for Naruto. The boy wasn't even trying at this point and had simply extended his duel with Storm just for his own excitement. Storm panted. She could barely stand on her feet after blocking another blast of Naruto's powerful wind and fire combination. It was easy enough to generate gusts of wind or lightning indoors, but it took much more energy to create large weather patterns without an actual environment to do it in. To top it off, the boy in front of her didn't look at all fazed by any of her attacks. The nonchalant air around him was beginning to get on her nerves. It was almost as though he didn't perceive to be a threat. Naruto cracked his knuckles and vanished in a burst of pure speed, appearing above her. She raised her forearm to stop Naruto's spinning downward kick. She watched as he casually changed the trajectory of his body so that he landed on the ground. Ororo felt her body fall as her legs were swept right from under her. My win, Naruto said confidently. Slink. She smirked. I wouldn't say that. Naruto felt Wolverine's claws tapping his back. Did you really think you could stop me with just a block of ice? Logan growled angrily. Naruto shook his head amusedly. I'm surprised that you managed to break free, though a lot of the work had been done by the heat from his fire jutsu. Logan grew more suspicious as the boy didn't seem to give any inclination that he was surprised by his presence. But you're not exactly the hardest to sense, Logan-san. Logan spun around as heard Naruto's voice echo from behind him. Phewan, his body suddenly seized up as he fell together ground, paralyzed from the power of Naruto's Phewan jutsu. His eyes widened slightly as he saw two Naruto standing over him, both of them grinning victoriously. Ororo asked, how is such a thing possible? A shinobi never gives away his secrets. Logan's eyes widened. He had recognized that Naruto was a very skilled fighter, but to call himself a shinobi, he couldn't sense a single bad bone in the boy's body. It was almost paradoxical how someone who appeared so jovial to the point of absurdity was an assassin. Naruto noted the disappointment and resignation in Ororo's voice and said softly, "Don't be so hard on yourself, this wasn't exactly a fair fight, to begin with." Ororo gave him a hard look, but Naruto quickly assuaged her anger, "And by that I mean you were focusing too much on controlling your power than you were at me." She sighed, "It's a byproduct of my ability, the more strength I use, the more I alter the climate around me." Naruto hummed to himself, "Then you just need to fine-tuning your control. He leant down and whispered in her ear, "Tell you what, since you can't train at full power without causing damage to the ecosystem, I'll give you access to one of my pocket dimensions to train." She questioned, "And what would you like in return?" Naruto shrugged, "Nothing really, I'm hoping that you get strong enough that you can become a good training partner. I've kind of grown bored of fighting my clones every day." Ororo twitched in annoyance at his reasoning. Naruto was definitely unhinged in more than one way. Charles's voice rang through the microphone, "Well done, Naruto, you have passed with flying colors. If you will, Hank wants to conduct some medical tests on you." Naruto gave the professor a mock salute as he headed towards the entrance to meet Beast. He sent his clone to heal all of the students, many of whom were slowly waking up. Logan could barely stifle out a murmured complaint about his current predicament. Naruto shouted, "Don't worry, it'll fade in an hour or so." "You all failed." Xavier rolled into the room with a frown. Scott muttered, "No shit." They were thoroughly beaten. It was almost embarrassing to call themselves the protectors of mutant kind if they were taken out so easily by a teenager. "I told y'all, we would lose." Evan shrugged carelessly. Kitty nodded, "Like what were you expecting would happen, Professor? You weren't supposed to beat me." Naruto's clone appeared suddenly in front of them with a fully healed Jean and Rogue. "It was a test to see how well you all work together." Kurt asked, "Then VE should pass." "No." He pointed towards Jean and Kitty. "VE came the closest to taking the bells from you." He was still upset that Naruto had managed to beat him at his own game. Naruto shook his head, "Your attacks were too disjointed. You attacked less as a team and more as individuals. Sure, you work together but only when necessary." He looked at Scott evenly. "Don't even get me started on how you decided to use your power. Did you really think that it was a good plan to just spray and pray?" Scott gritted his teeth angrily, "Who are you to tell me?" Naruto's arm shot forward and grabbed Scott by the neck. The boy chalked under his grip. Naruto looked over at all the stunned students. "What if I was your real enemy, what would you all do then?" He gripped tighter. He peered down at Scott, who was struggling against his arm. "The second one of you is captured, the enemy gains the upper hand." Naruto pointed at Kitty. "I could do this. Kitty, kill Jean right now or Scott dies." Kitty's eyes widened. Her body shut down as she stared at how Scott was whimpering under Naruto's crushing grip. Xavier said firmly, "Naruto, that's enough." Naruto let Scott go. The boy fell to the ground wheezing pain. He looked at the group and said, "The world is changing. People are becoming more and more aware of mutant kind. We must all prepare, not just to protect other mutants but to protect ourselves from those who wish to cause us harm. Things would be different this time," Xavier promised to himself. "Why is your fur blue? Anybody ever tell you that you look like a cross between a cat and a monkey? I bet all that fur gets in the way when you, arg." Beast pricked his needle harshly into Naruto's wrist in pure frustration as he tried to draw some blood out from the unruly boy. He wondered which of the gods he had upset to have to deal with Naruto's insatiable curiosity for his affliction and inability to not sit still for a single minute. "This is so boring," Naruto exclaimed. His eyes flickered over to the machine that Beast had placed his blood sample in. "I'm in perfectly good health. I don't know why I need a physical." "Indeed, you are, Naruto," Beast replied. He focused on the results of Naruto's genomic sequencing and full-body scans. "Fascinating. I can't say I've ever seen a body quite like yours." Naruto deadpanned, "I'm not from around here. But you are still human. There have been occasions that mutants from different universes have been detected by Cerebro." Beast's screen changed to one depicting the movement of Naruto's cells. He ran them through his biosim program to see how they responded to stress. So that's your mutation. What is it?" Naruto couldn't comprehend what was happening on Beast's computer screen. It just looked like circular blobs elongating and sliding around all over the place. He noticed a glowing yellow circle brighten and encapsulate around the blob each time it was attacked by the program. Beast said, "I had originally thought that your mutation was directly related to this energy of yours. It's not uncommon for an X gene to be directly affected by one's environment or heritage. However, it would appear that in your case, your mutation seems to be what is enhancing your chakra." He pressed a few buttons and a body scan appeared on the screen. Naruto watched in slight fascination as he saw streams of energy flowing into his body. "See this?" Beast pointed to the computer screen. "I believe your ability to passively absorb ambient energy and convert it to chakra was a result of your time in the dream dimension. Similarly, I found several indications that if continual stress is applied to your cells, they will undergo a process of extreme adaptation." Huh? Naruto had no idea what this guy was talking about. Seriously, Mizuki was better at explaining things than this guy. Beast sighed. "Imagine for a moment that someone poisoned you. Your body will feel the effects of the poison for a short while before you become completely immune to it." Naruto frowned, "But I've always had that ability. Kurama certainly made it hard for anything to kill him. There were occasions where he wouldn't even heal because the blasted fox didn't want to help." "I heard that, Naruto," Kurama growled from the depths of his mind, "but the furry one is right. You have always possessed an overactive regenerative factor. I just enhanced it. Some would even go as far as to compare you Uzumaki are like cockroaches." Now that was a low blow, but he supposed that there was some element of truth in his words. "Naruto, Naruto. Are you there?" Hank asked, wondering if he had truly bored him to sleep. Naruto snapped out of his stupor. He had been so focused on his thoughts that he had completely neglected the man in front of him. Beast chuckled, "Good, I thought I lost you for a moment." He waited a moment to make sure Naruto wasn't going to zone out before speaking. "As I was saying, whilst your mutation is not as showy as many of the other mutants here, it certainly is a powerful one." Beast smirked when he noticed that he had captured Naruto's full attention. "So to speak, your mutation is the perfect fit for your powers. It's quite astounding really. Your reactive adaptation works in tow with your chakra, making you faster and stronger each time you use your chakra to enhance your body." It certainly did explain why he was so fast and strong without calling upon his chakra. He still was somewhat unsure what the full capabilities of this so-called mutation were, but that would come to light in due time. He asked, "Is that all?" Hank nodded. "Yes, there is little else I can do with what little genetic material I have acquired from you." Naruto gave him an appreciative thumbs up as he headed out of the lab. Hank quickly said, "I'd advise you to keep your mutation under wraps for now." "Why?" Naruto questioned. "X genes that can continually adapt are incredibly rare and are very useful to certain, unsavory individuals," Beast replied. "Possessing a mutation like yours might be the key to developing multiple powers." Naruto sighed at the prospect of having to deal with another Orochimaru. He could imagine just how annoying it would be fighting someone who had all of the X-Men's powers. Especially Jean and Xavier's psychokinesis. The two of them agreed to delete all information about his powers and genetic profile. Naruto headed to his room for some needed rest. His mind was still somewhat numb from all that information that he had received from his clones. Naruto winced as a series of new memories suddenly popped into his head. He pinched his nose in annoyance. For God's sake, can't they go a minute without doing something stupid? He was already going to have a hard time connecting with the students as it were, and he doubted that they would be keen on having him around after his clone threatened one of their own. It would do them good to learn that lesson before it is too late, Kurama said. Naruto agreed, but he also realized that the students did not come from a background similar to his own. The majority of mutants lived peacefully as civilians until they manifested their powers, and even then, it was certainly easy enough to just continue living as they were. Naruto let a tired yawn as he plopped himself onto his bed. There was little point pondering about all of this now, he would just have to deal with it in the morning. Morning came, and with it arrived the inescapably loud stampede of students rushing to get ready for school. Naruto rubbed his eyes tiredly as he found himself abruptly woken up by all of the commotion. Naruto threw open his bedroom door angrily. He would have words with the bastards who had interrupted his beauty sleep. If I hear one more word. He stopped himself from speaking when he came face to face with Ororo. Ororo blushed embarrassedly as she stood mere inches away from a practically naked Naruto who was just wearing boxers. She could barely stop her eyes from trailing down his musculature. Surprised by just how lean and tight his body was, she shook herself from her trance and peered at him with annoyance. "Where do you think you are going dressed like that?" A gust of air blew Naruto back into his room. "Get dressed and come down for breakfast." Naruto landed awkwardly against his bed frame as Ororo slammed the door in his face. He chuckled at Ororo's reaction and wondered why he always seemed to attract women who had somewhat violent tendencies. Regardless, if she thought he wasn't going to get her back for that, she was in for a rude awakening. But before any of that, he had to meditate once more. Naruto realized early on that mastery of the Rinnegan was sorely dependent on one's control of oneself, or rather there was a final path that both Nagato and Madara had yet to learn, the inner path. The path of enlightenment was said to be the pinnacle of the Rinnegan's power, the ability to control creation itself. Naruto had yet to even find what this path was. He could feel each time he meditated, but it was remained out of his grasp. Kurama muttered, "You're just as annoying as he was. Meditate this, meditate that." "Shush, Kurama, I need to concentrate." A pure white aura blanketed over him. He could feel the world around him with ever-increasing clarity, the earth's tumultuous rage, the emotions of those in the mansion and beyond. This was different than before. In the dream dimension all he could really feel was himself, but here it was as if he had tapped into the world around him. Kurama watched from the depths of Naruto's mind. He smiled proudly. "You were right, he truly is the one." He had always known that his partner would become the one to carry the mantle of his father. No, Kurama truly believed that Naruto would transcend him. The bijou had little time to ponder as he felt something dark emanate around his host's body. He growled and slammed his hands together in a show of true strength. "Snap out of it, Naruto." Kurama's chakra erupted out and grabbed onto the darkness. Naruto's eyes slowly opened, dazed and confused as to what had just happened. A dark cloud danced in front of him. He couldn't see it, so to speak, but he could sense it with his senjutsu. The cloud frizzled out as soon as it realized that it had been detected. "What was that?" Kurama asked. Naruto frowned. "I don't know, but he had a feeling that it was linked to his sage mode. When he had taped into nature, it no longer felt warm as it did back home. Instead it felt cold and empty. Whatever that cloud was, it was trying to corrupt him like it more than likely did to any other nature user. He would get answers, but right now he had more important matters to handle, namely feeding his growling stomach. Oh! Naruto arrived at the dining room in a flash, surprised that nobody was there besides Ororo, Logan and Charles. "Where are the others?" Ororo replied, "They're already making their way to school." Naruto let out a sigh of relief. He didn't really feel like having to deal with all the negative emotions that he had sensed before. Charles said, "Come sit, Naruto." The bald telepath folded his newspaper as he drank some more of his tea. "Hank told me about your mutation, regeneration and energy manipulation. It is an intriguing combination, to say the least." Naruto shrugged. "I don't know the half of anything to do with all this mutation stuff." Logan snorted in agreement at how boring all of this scientific talk was. Though it was to be expected when you lived with not one but two world-renowned geniuses, but I'm sure it's not uncommon to find people with two differing mutations. Charles hummed in contemplation. "Hank also has a secondary mutation, though not as extreme as yours." Naruto let out a mental sigh of relief as the telepath decided not to probe further into his deception. "Perhaps we will encounter more mutants with such abilities in due time." Naruto asked, "You mentioned something about danger last night. Is there anybody I should be worried about?" Logan grunted. "Well, there's Magneto and his group of lackeys. They call themselves the Brotherhood of Mutants. I'd say the only one who's a threat to you is Magneto himself." "Who is Magneto?" Charles answered, "An old friend of mine. He and I parted as a result of our differing stances on humanity. He believes that the only way for peace is through fear and intimidation. He's a very powerful mutant that has the ability of magnetism." Naruto thought, just like Danzo, "Huh. Let's seek him out. I want to stretch my legs out a little." Kurama replied. The fox was getting somewhat antsy with Naruto's lack of using him. Naruto snorted, "I'd rather not alert everyone that I have a demon fox inside me." He was sure that some entities were more than likely seeking him out. If Xavier could find him, it was only a matter of time before some other organization came knocking on this door. He would only use Kurama as a deterrent. "I'm not giving you any of my chakra," Kurama huffed in annoyance. Love you too, Naruto chuckled as he cut off the connection. He turned to the professor who gave him a knowing look. If you need someone to deal with him, I'm willing. Logan growled, gonna kill him are ya, bub? Like you would? He questioned. Logan froze at Naruto's assertion, your fighting style is made to either maim or kill. You got me there kid. Logan stood up abruptly, I'm going into the city, I'll be back later, he told Charles as he slinked out of the room, muttering something about having to deal with Sabretooth again. Ororo sighed, he always leaves to avoid doing any work around here. Sometimes I wonder if he's just freeloading. She took a bite out of her apple and stared at Naruto with a heavy expression. Of course that means you'll have to substitute for him. Poof. Ororo's eyes widened as she watched 100 or so clones appear out of the heavy smoke. Naruto waved his hands lazily, go clean. You heard the boss, one of the clones shouted. They all filed out of the room in a chaotic manner, crashing and bumping things over. Naruto facebombed in exasperation at his clone's antics. You can make that many? Ororo asked, still surprised. She had seen him create one yesterday, but to think that he could create a veritable army, it made her feel somewhat inadequate. Naruto gave her a cheeky smile. You haven't scratched the surface of what I can do, princess. Call me that again, she dared. A cold breeze whipped around her in a menacing fashion. The table around her slowly began to freeze from the temperature. Lightning crackled in the sky and the skies grayed from Storm's slight anger. So that's her true power, Naruto thought as he felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere. He had originally believed that she simply controlled the individual elements that encompassed weather, but it was becoming increasingly more clear that Storm possessed no such ability. Instead, she simply changed meteorological events to her whims, or rather her temper. Ororo, Charles warned, she let her powers dissipate as she simply huffed and exited the room. Naruto looked at the professor and wondered what he had done to trigger her to such an extent. I wouldn't worry about it. Ororo has a bad history being called such things. Her powers made her somewhat of a godlike figure back home, Charles explained. Naruto simply nodded and returned his concentration back to his food, which was thankfully not frozen. Naruto and Xavier sat in silence as they finished their respective breakfast. Naruto enjoyed eating the fluffy pancakes whilst he inscribed a few sealing arrays on a throwaway piece of paper. The design of any singular seal required intensive testing and an even more exhaustive process of trial and error. It was the reason why most shinobi never truly bothered with learning the art. Unlike the other shinobi art, mastering Fuinjutsu in its entirety was a lifelong endeavor, and even then, one would usually only be able to master certain subsets. The only exception was the Uzumaki, who had over generations cultivated a gargantuan library of knowledge about Fuinjutsu, which added to their prodigious talent made it all the easier for them to learn and expound on certain topics. Sadly, Naruto had to self-teach him everything. It was painful and very dangerous. He remembered at some point almost losing his limbs as a result of trying to create a warp seal that was similar to Kamui. He grinned triumphantly as he looked at the completed array. Perfect, he thought. The professor asked, what are you working on? It's a seal for Rogue, Naruto explained. Charles looked at him quizzically, wondering why Rogue would need a seal. From what I have gathered, Rogue's powers are passively active. She absorbs whatever she touches. The professor nodded, curious to see what Naruto had designed. This is a limiter seal. It will cover her skin with an invisible barrier so that she can touch people without, well, hurting them. And what about when she needs to use her powers? All she needs a code word. The seal will recognize it and will deactivate itself, Naruto said triumphantly. Beast and I were getting worried that there was no way to circumvent her powers. Your seal is a great relief. I will send her to you as soon as she returns back home, Charles said. He pressed a chair on his wheelchair and began to drive off to his study. In the meantime, I advise that you spend the rest of the day devising a lesson plan for your danger room session with the students. Naruto looked at the messy table and realized that both Ororo and Xavier had sneakily left him to do all the dishes. He sighed in annoyance as he broadcasted his thoughts. I expect to be paid for this, old man. Xavier chuckled in his head. I'll pay you when I see you doing work. Naruto already knew that the professor was the type to pay with rewards instead of with actual money. Little did he know that Naruto was an expert in matters of personal finance, and he would have compensation for having to do such menial labor. Naruto had spent the rest of the morning and early afternoon cleaning and preparing for his danger room lesson with Ororo's assistance. The technology in the room was incredibly useful and several orders of magnitude more complicated than anything that was in Konoha, but it was surprisingly easy to pick up. The room could literally create lifelike simulations of any scenario and environment so long as it was given the necessary constraints. I think we should split them into different teams, Naruto said as he watched the recording of their fight from last night. Ororo disagreed. If we do that, then they will never learn to work together. I'm not saying we need to split them up. Some of them require very different methods of training. He studied the list of mutants in front of him. Each mutant's powers were comprehensively detailed alongside videos of their runs in the danger room. He expanded a simulation run that the Logan had done with Kitty, Evan and Cyclops. Ororo and Naruto watched as the students all failed to complete Logan's simulation due to their bad hand-to-hand combat ability. Do you see what I mean? Ororo nodded. It wasn't easy to spot, but analyzing their habits made it all the more clearer. They are all fighting the same way. They need to learn a fighting style that is complementary to their abilities, otherwise they aren't going to improve, Naruto concluded. He watched as Ororo swiped her hand, moving the holographic list away and conjuring some sort of timetable. She proposed, perhaps instead of splitting them up, we can each take an individual class. Logan will teach hand-to-hand combat whilst you and I focus on them learning to control their powers, Naruto agreed. They didn't have many students at the moment and splitting them at the moment might lead to even more hostility. There was a brief rap on the door. Both Ororo and Naruto turned to see Rogue entering the room. The professor said to meet you here, she said annoyedly. He guessed that she was still angry about what his clone did last night. Ororo, if you please, Naruto asked. Ororo nodded, realizing that this was a private matter between the two of them. She gave Rogue a pointed look as she left. The girl simply huffed whilst she leant against the metal wall, coolly gazing at Naruto. What do you want? I have things to do. Naruto teased. You have something more important than getting your touch back. Rogue's eyes widened at what Naruto had just said. Her lips quivered slightly at the possibility that she could once more feel human contact without hurting anybody. You can really do that? She asked hopefully. You can take away my powers. Naruto shook his head. I can't remove your powers, so to speak. Her expression became somewhat downtrodden. But I can do the next best thing. I can stop your powers from activating when they touch you. How? He popped out a scroll from his pocket. Rogue watched as he unfurled it, revealing what appeared to be a complicated array surrounded with scribbles in a language she couldn't comprehend. Since your powers function through touch, I can create an intangible barrier around your skin that will protect others from your powers, at least until you can master them. That is, of course, if you want it. Rogue nodded rapidly and without any thought. She would do anything to get rid of these powers. Can you do it now? She asked. Naruto gazed firmly at Rogue. Don't become overly dependent on my seal. You still need to work on learning to control your powers. He knew what Rogue was feeling. He had been intimately familiar with it. That crushing feeling with being burdened with a power that felt more like a curse than a blessing. But had it not been for that power, Naruto doubted that he would have survived this long. Seeing that she understood, he began his preparations for the ritual. He pointed to the middle of the room. Please sit and roll up your sleeves. Rogue did as she was told, watching curiously as Naruto channeled his chakra. The writing on the scroll glowed an ethereal blue. He laid the scroll onto her arms and muttered, "Transcription seal, release." The ink rose from the page and spread across her skin as if it were alive. The seal transcribed itself onto her until her entire body was covered in ink. She couldn't see anything. Her vision was covered by darkness and she felt as if she was on fire. Naruto asked, "Rogue, can you hear me?" "Ah, can hear you," she said breathlessly. "I need you to think of an activation word. It will allow you to transition between activating and deactivation your powers." She thought of the one thing that mattered to her at the moment. She felt her body lightened and the ink settled under her skin until it was no longer visible. Done. Was that all? She asked. Besides the initial discomfort during the ritual, she didn't feel any different than before. No loss of sensations. Heck, she felt slightly more sensitive to the cold air than before. Naruto nodded. You can touch over people now. Here. His hand hovered over her own. Rogue reluctantly did as he wanted. She reached out and gently grasped his hand. Her eyes widened when she no longer felt the powerful pull of her powers. Tears welled in her eyes and Naruto was suddenly felt enveloped in a powerful hug. Ororo peeked through the door with a smile as she watched as the two embraced. He had done what nobody else could have done, and for that, she was truly thankful. Oh, why is Teach meditating? Evan asked as he entered the danger room. I hope this isn't one of those find your inner focus lessons. Scott snorted. He's obviously not in the right state of mind. He was tempted to fire one of his optic beams at Naruto but realized that the bastard would probably sense it coming regardless. Rogue rolled her eyes. You're just angry about what happened last night. She looked over at Naruto who sat cross-legged in the middle of the room. He's genuinely a good person. Kitty cast her dubious look. She muttered, biased much. Rogue turned to her roommate with an angry expression. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. Jean tried to act as the peacekeeper. Calm down, Naruto already apologized for what his clones did. Evan grinned. If Auntie O can vouch for him, he's all good in my book. Besides, if what the professor said about Naruto was true, he could not wait to learn some cool ninja tricks. Ororo strode into the room carrying an annoyed Kurt with her wind. The blue furry devil shouted, I was in the middle of a game. She said, you can play your game later. She made sure that everyone was accounted for before she began the lesson. Alright, there will be no simulation today. Instead, we will be focusing on your close-quarter combat. Kitty raised her hand. Doesn't like Logan teach us that already? Logan will be in charge of your group simulations from now on, Ororo addressed. The students all groaned at having to undergo Wolverine's torturous runs. She looked down at Naruto and whispered, your turn. Alright, I want everybody to partner up. He put them all into groups. Jean was partnered up with Rogue, Kitty with Kurt and Evan with Scott. Let's do some group stretches. The class began with a series of stretches and partner exercises where Naruto taught them some basic grapples and katas. He was surprised by how quickly Kitty had picked them up. Despite the girl appearing quite vain, she possessed a very sharp mind. He smiled slightly as he remembered who she reminded him of. The class continued for another half hour until they reached the final exercise. Naruto wanted them to spar their partners as a way to assess their progress and to adjust his teaching plan for each of them. Don't use your powers. The aim of the exercise is to either submit your opponent or to take them off the mat. Rogue and Jean, if you will, Naruto asked. Jean and Rogue stood in front of each other. They bowed gingerly, but it was easy to see that neither girl particularly fancied the other. Begin. Jean shot her legs forward as she attempted a roundhouse kick towards Rogue's midsection. Naruto grinned as he watched Rogue simply lean back and deflect the kick towards the side, leaving her exposed to a spinning back kick that hit Jean straight in the stomach. Jean fell onto the ground, gasping slightly as her breathing was disrupted. Naruto blew his whistle. Jean is out of bounds. The winner is Rogue. Rogue gave Jean a triumphant smile as she walked away. Naruto sighed at the hostility between the two of them. He offered Jean his arm and helped her up. Next, Scott and Evan. Both of the boys gave each other a fist bump before they moved to either side of the mat. Once the fight had started, they dashed towards each other with no particular style in mind than to simply pummel the other. Scott had the upper hand in technique whilst Evan possessed much greater natural strength and durability. Scott learnt that immediately when Evan blocked one of his punches, he winced in slight pain as he felt his knuckles crack from the hardness of Evan's bones. He gritted his teeth. Scott moved despite the pain. He dodged Evan's punch and delivered a powerful uppercut to the boy's chin. His right hand was definitely broken now. Evan stumbled back but controlled himself in time to dodge a shove from Scott. He punched Scott's face. Crack. Scott was blown back by Evan's sheer strength, but he would not lose. He held himself on and continued marching towards him. Evan raised his hands when he saw Scott's bleeding knuckles and swollen cheek. Look, man, I don't want to continue. It's cool, teach, I resign. Naruto nodded, grateful that he didn't have to stop the fight. He looked at Scott, who growled at Evan. He had severely misjudged the Summers boy. The boy certainly didn't possess any sort of tactical mastery or notable charisma, but he was the leader of this team solely because of his conviction. What it was, he had no idea. But it was enough for him to fight through all that pain. That's enough class for today, Naruto said. They all gave their thanks and began to file out of the room. He watched as Scott gave a castaway look towards his young seal before grimacing and walking away. Naruto sighed. That boy was too proud to admit that he wanted him to heal him. Is this what Bachan always felt? I need a drink. Ororo muttered. I'll go check on him. Naruto broadcasted his thoughts, telling the professor that he was going out. Oh. Exploring New York City in the dead of the night was a completely different experience than it was in the day. It seemed like that was when all the wrong kinds of people decided it was time to venture out. He found himself in the middle of Chinatown, a place that reminded him very slightly of home. He stopped in front of a Japanese bar. The familiar scent of dango and ramen attracted him. "How can I help you?" an old Japanese woman asked gently. "Can I have some ramen?" Naruto asked, "and a bottle of sake?" The woman bowed and disappeared into the back to cook his food. Naruto looked around the room and saw dozens of couples conversing and eating. He wondered how they could be so blissfully ignorant with all the crimes and villains terrorizing the city. He heard the brief screeching of the chair beside him as a woman sat beside him. "Mind if I join you?"